I stared at him for a long moment. Did you not hear the part about hope being a structural component of your skeleton right now? I heard it, sir, but I am already behind the standard curriculum because of Earth's gravity differential. I cannot afford 3 weeks in bed. There was something in his eyes when he said it, not the hot defiance of a young soldier refusing to accept weakness, not stubbornness born from pride. It was something older, something more measured, the quiet determination I had seen only in career soldiers who had survived things that should have killed them. The kind of look that understands the full cost of what it's doing and pays it anyway. 2.5 weeks, I said finally, and you will follow every single protocol I assign without modification, deviation, or creative interpretation. No exceptions. Yes, sir. He followed every protocol. More than that, he exceeded several. I have treated hundreds of patients through rehabilitation, and I had never observed a human press through recovery exercises with such absolute, unblinking focus. His pain tolerance was unusual and not in the way I first assumed. Humans feel pain acutely. Their nerve density is actually higher than most species I treat. Marcus felt every bit of it. He had simply decided, somewhere in the architecture of his mind, that pain was data he didn't need to act on. He categorized it, filed it away, and continued working. Renovos visited him every day. She was not an emotional being. Valurans rarely are, but she sat beside his bed with an expression I had never seen on her species' face before. He should not have been able to reach me, she told me quietly during one of her visits. The atmospheric pressure alone at that altitude should have rendered him non-functional. How did he even maintain consciousness? Humans, I said, have a remarkable and personally infuriating ability to simply decide that physics does not apply to them when someone they care about is in danger. I am still working on the medical explanation. Marcus returned to training in exactly 2.5 weeks. I monitored his vitals remotely for the first several days, braced for a relapse. Instead, his performance metrics improved. He moved through exercises with a precision and economy of effort that had not been there before, as though nearly dying had calibrated something in him. I have been treating soldiers for 17 cycles. I still do not fully understand humans. 4 months passed. Marcus became known among the cadets as someone reliable. Not flashy, not aggressive, not the type to seek attention or rank. He showed up, did the work, helped when help was needed, and went quietly back to his quarters when it wasn't. In a galaxy full of species that defined strength through dominance and display, his kind of strength was easy to overlook. Then came the Krell Mountain exercise, and nothing about Marcus Hale was easy to overlook again. The Krell range is hostile by any species standards. Sub-zero temperatures, thin atmosphere, predatory wildlife that considers most Academy cadets an acceptable meal. The exercise was simple in concept. Teams of 6 cadets had to cross 30 miles of mountain terrain in 48 hours carrying full combat loads. Simple, not easy. Most years, we lost cadets to exposure or wildlife encounters. It was considered acceptable attrition, which always struck me as a grim phrase but an accurate one. Marcus was assigned to Blue Team. 3 Vexi heavy combat specialists, 1 Keeltherian navigator, 1 Morphew scout, and 1 human endurance specialist. I was stationed at base camp, monitoring vitals for all teams from the medical observation array. Standard procedure. 3 to 4 hours into the exercise, Blue Team's vital signs went haywire. The Keeltherian navigator had miscalculated a crossing point. The ice bridge they were traversing collapsed beneath them, and all 6 cadets plunged into a glacial ravine 200 feet deep. I watched their biometric feed spike and then scatter into chaos. The 3 Vexi had taken the impact across their dense, combat-adapted bodies and were injured but stable. The Morphew scout had partially phased during the fall, bleeding off the worst of the kinetic energy. The Keeltherian navigator was not stable. His readings showed severe cranial trauma, multiple internal injuries, and a body temperature dropping with terrifying speed. He had perhaps 2 hours before hypothermia finished what the fall had started. Then I looked at Marcus's readings. He had landed across a boulder on his back. The impact pattern suggested at least 3 cracked ribs and significant spinal trauma. The pain indicator spiked into a range I had only seen once before, the day he had gone after Renovos. Massive adrenaline response. Cortisol flooding his system. His body screaming at every nerve ending that it had been seriously damaged. And then, while I watched, His heart rate steadied. His oxygen consumption normalized. His pain indicators simply stopped registering. I checked my sensors twice. There was no malfunction. Marcus Hale had, by every biological measure available to me, turned off his pain response. The audio feed crackled. Blue team to base camp. We have casualties. Requesting immediate extraction. That was one of the Vexi, not Marcus. Negative, blue team. The response from Academy Command was flat and immediate. Extraction craft cannot operate in current weather conditions. Estimated wait time, 6 hours. 6 hours. The Keel Therian would be dead in 2. Silence on the audio feed. I watched Marcus's vital signs. Steady, controlled. Wrong for someone with his injuries. Deeply, unnervingly wrong. Then his location beacon began to move. What is he doing? I muttered, leaning toward the display. He was climbing out of a 200-foot near vertical glacial ravine in sub-zero temperatures with 3 cracked ribs and spinal trauma, using handholds cut into walls of solid ice with his bare fingers. The atmospheric sensors showed the temperature at the ravine floor hovering around negative 30 degrees. No climbing equipment, no thermal augmentation, just a human body that had apparently decided the situation required it to perform. He reached the top in 18 minutes. Then he started running. Dr. Thoric. One of my assistants touched my arm, pointing at the main display. Cadet Hale's biometrics. I don't understand these readings. Neither did I. Medically speaking, he should have been unconscious. The level of pain suppression his body was generating should have caused total neurological shutdown. The energy expenditure of climbing that ravine should have depleted him entirely. Instead, Marcus was running 4 miles across hostile mountain terrain to the nearest emergency supply cache. He retrieved a medical stasis pod designed for critical condition transport. Then he ran 4 miles back. 8 miles. 41 minutes. At altitude, in extreme cold, with broken ribs and spinal damage. When he reached the ravine again, he rigged a climbing line, anchored it to his own body weight, and rappelled back down into the darkness. He lowered the stasis pod to his team, and then, with one of the Vexi relaying what medical knowledge they had, talked them through stabilizing the Keel Therian navigator well enough to seal him into the pod. Only then did Marcus Hale's vital signs begin to crash. I scrambled the emergency medical team the moment I saw the readings collapse. We reached Blue Team 3 hours later. 3 hours of darkness and wind and cold that I spent watching Marcus's biometrics thread closer and closer to a threshold I didn't want to see crossed. The Keel Therian navigator was alive. The stasis pod had preserved him perfectly. Marcus was unconscious, hypothermic, his body finally, stubbornly, acknowledging every bit of damage he had been carrying in silence for hours. I treated him personally. Again, for the second time in 4 months, I worked on this young human and tried not to think too hard about the fact that by every medical model I trusted, he should not have been capable of what he had done. The lead Vexi, a battle-hardened specialist who had fought in 17 campaigns across 9 worlds, stood beside me as I worked and said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than I had ever heard from his species. Doctor, I have seen warriors do impossible things through sheer force of will. I have stood next to soldiers who continued fighting through wounds that would have stopped most beings cold. He paused. That human should be dead, multiple times over. How is he still breathing? I did not have an answer, not one that made clean medical sense. When Marcus woke 2 days later, his first words were completely predictable. Did everyone make it? Yes, Cadet, everyone made it. Because you apparently do not recognize physical limitations as a concept that applies to you. He smiled weakly. Humans are good at ignoring limitations, so... Ignoring and surviving are very different things. He looked at me with those steady dark eyes. Are they, though? And that, I think, is the moment I truly began to understand what made humans dangerous. Marcus spent another week in my medical wing. During that time, something shifted in the Academy's atmosphere, a subtle change I noticed first in the way cadets moved through the corridors outside my observation windows, and later in the visitors who began appearing at his door. Word had spread, not through official channels. The Academy does not celebrate cadets who circumvent chain of command protocols, however effective the results. But cadets talk. They always talk. The story grew with each retelling. By day 3, Marcus had apparently climbed a 300-foot ravine. By day 5, he had fought off a pack of ice predators barehanded. By day 7, certain cadets were insisting he had carried all 5 teammates out simultaneously. Ridiculous, all of it. But the truth underneath the legend was real, and the cadets who knew the difference between myth and fact were, if anything, more shaken by the truth than by the embellishments. Vexy warriors who would not normally acknowledge a human cadet's existence came to stand in his doorway and nod. Keeltherian strategists who considered Earth species beneath serious military consideration brought datapads loaded with advanced training materials. Even a cluster of Morpheus operatives, who rarely spoke to anyone, materialized in the corridor and left small tokens outside his door without a word. Energy bars calibrated for human metabolism, extra thermal blankets. A single carved stone from the Krell Range that I suspected one of the Vexy had retrieved personally. Marcus accepted everything with quiet, genuine gratitude. He never drew attention to what he had done. Never let the story become about him in any room where he had control over the narrative. It drove me absolutely mad. You do realize, I told him during one of his examinations, that you are being studied now. Every species in this academy is trying to map the outer edges of what humans are capable of. Some of them will test you. They will look for your breaking point. Everyone has a breaking point, Dr. Thoric. Yes, but humans seem uniquely skilled at relocating theirs to whatever distance is currently inconvenient for the circumstances. He laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and for just a moment he looked exactly like what he was, a young man a long way from home, doing something extraordinary and barely aware of it. That might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me since I arrived here, so I released him back to training with strict instructions to avoid anything involving heights, extreme temperatures, or rescuing anyone for at least a month. He agreed far too quickly. I should have known better. 6 weeks later, the Academy held its annual combat trials, mixed species teams competing through randomized scenarios designed to test tactical thinking, adaptability, and survival under compounding pressure. Winners received ceremonial honors and preferential placement considerations after graduation. Marcus was assigned a gold team with 4 cadets I had never treated. I took this as a genuinely positive sign. For once, perhaps, he would have a competition experience that did not involve him nearly dying. Gold team placed 3rd in the urban warfare simulation. Respectable. They placed 5th in zero-gravity combat. Marcus, predictably, struggled with a disorientation, a fair and scientifically sensible limitation given human evolutionary development in consistent planetary gravity. They placed 2nd in the deep water resource extraction, which surprised me pleasantly. Marcus had adapted to aquatic conditions with characteristic stubbornness. Everything was going normally. I should have recognized what that meant. The 4th trial was a hostage extraction scenario. Automated defense systems. Simulated enemy combatants. A 20-minute time limit. Failure meant point deductions. No actual danger, except someone had made a catastrophic error in the system's programming. I was in the medical observation deck when the sensors showed me what was happening before anyone else had processed it. The defense turrets in the simulation structure had defaulted to live protocols instead of training mode. The safety overrides had failed somewhere in the initialization chain. The simulation was running with real ammunition. Shut it down. I was already moving toward the control booth. Those are live rounds. Shut the entire system down now. The technicians were scrambling. The system isn't responding. Manual override is failing. On the screens, Gold Team had scattered for cover. The first burst had missed, and the cadets still thought it was training fire, until Cadet Yurik Vulov, a human heavy weapon specialist, took a round through the shoulder. Real blood, real damage, real screaming. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos on the audio feed, sharp and immediate. Live fire, live fire. Everyone find hard cover, now. The team moved fast and professionally, but they were trapped. The automated systems had sealed the exits per standard hostage scenario protocol to prevent simulated enemy escape. Now those same locks were sealing 5 cadets inside a structure with turrets cycling through 300 rounds per minute. I grabbed my field kit and activated my emergency medical beacon. I was already headed for the facility, shouting for a security override team, when I watched Marcus do something that made even my Gordanian nervous system go cold. He left cover. Not in a panic. Not by accident. He calculated the distance to Vulov's position, read the turret cycle patterns, and ran, full sprint across open ground, while rounds shoot up the floor centimeters behind his heels. He reached Vulov, dragged him bodily behind a concrete barrier, and had a tourniquet applied with hands that did not shake before the team suppressing fire had even established a rhythm. Hale, stay behind cover. That was his team leader. Marcus looked at the override panel mounted on the far wall, a panel that required crossing 40 feet of completely exposed ground with 3 turret positions bearing directly on it. The override panel is accessible from inside the room, he said, his voice carrying an eerie, almost clinical calm. I can reach it. If I don't try, we all die when the security breach team arrives and the system targets them too. You'll be killed. Probably. Cover me for 17 seconds. I have reviewed the footage approximately 200 times since that day. I have done so not from morbid fascination, but because I am a medical professional, and what I watched Marcus Hale do across those 40 feet of open ground represents a physiological event I still cannot fully explain. The turrets were calibrated to stop Vexi warriors in full combat armor. Marcus was wearing a training vest and nothing else. The system fired with a mechanical precision of hardware that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bluffed, and cannot be distracted. It simply calculated trajectories and shot. Marcus moved as though trajectory was suggestion. What humans call getting in the zone. I have read the neurological literature, the studies on flow states and optimal performance, the documentation of soldiers in combat performing beyond their measured physical parameters. I have always considered it interesting data, somewhat overstated. Watching it in real time, at lethal stakes, with my medical senses screaming at me about the probability values being violated, it was something else entirely. He serpentined. He dropped. He pivoted at angles that human joints are not supposed to achieve cleanly at full sprint. One round grazed his calf. A second tore through his training vest without touching skin. A third missed his skull by less than 2 centimeters and left a streak of displaced air that registered on the motion sensors. He reached the panel. He punched in the emergency override code. The turrets went silent. 17 seconds. He had been in the open for exactly 17 seconds. The security breach team arrived 8 seconds later. They found Gold Team shaken but alive. They found Vulov stabilized and conscious. They found the lethal threat completely deactivated. And they found Marcus Hale sitting against the wall with his back to it, bleeding steadily from his calf, staring at nothing with a particular hollow expression of someone whose body has just finished doing something it wasn't supposed to be able to do. I reached him 90 seconds after the breach team. Cadet, where are you injured? He blinked, focused on me. Just a leg, sir. Vulov needs priority. Vulov is already being transported. Let me see the leg. It was more than a graze. The round had carved a furrow through his calf muscle, deep, bleeding steadily, the kind of wound that would send most species into neurogenic shock before they could form a coherent sentence. Marcus sat quietly while I worked on it, his breathing even, his eyes tracking the activity around us with that same measured, cataloging gaze he brought to everything. This is going to hurt, I told him as I prepared the closure adhesive. It already hurts, so might as well fix it. General Frex arrived while I was finishing the bandaging. The Academy Commandant was 12 feet of Vexi War veteran, a being who had personally led campaigns across 4-star systems, and he stood over Marcus with an expression I had never seen on his face in 9 years of service together. He looked at the deactivated turrets. He looked at the blood on the floor. He looked at Marcus Hale sitting against the wall with a fresh bandage on his leg, and absolutely no drama about any of it. Cadet Hale. His voice was like grinding tectonic plates. You disobeyed your team leader's direct order to remain in cover. Yes, sir, I did. You exposed yourself to lethal automated weapons fire without authorization. Yes, sir. You risked your life for teammates you have known for less than 2 months. Marcus considered this with apparent genuine puzzlement. So, I didn't really factor in the time frame. They needed help. Frex was silent for a long moment. In 9 years, I had never once seen him uncertain about anything. He was a being who had watched civilizations clash and made decisions that cost thousands of lives without flinching, because certainty was built into the architecture of his command. He looked uncertain now. Come with me, cadet. Marcus stood, carefully, because the leg was still bleeding, because some things even Marcus Hale could not simply decide not to feel, and fell into step beside the general. This slight, pale human keeping quiet pace with a 12-foot war veteran as they walked out of the ruined simulation room together. "Am I being expelled, sir?" "No, cadet." Frex's voice was unreadable. "You are being reassessed." 3 hours later, I was summoned to the commandant's office. In 9 years of service, I had been summoned there exactly twice, both times for medical emergencies requiring immediate command-level decisions. I arrived to find not just General Frex, but the full Academy Leadership Council, 12 species, 12 distinct military traditions, 12 sets of eyes focused on a data pad displaying Marcus Hale's complete Academy record. "Dr. Thoric." Frex's opening was direct. "You have treated Cadet Hale more than any other student in Academy history. Medical opinion, is he stable?" "Define stable, General." "Is he a danger to himself or others through reckless behavior?" I thought carefully about how to answer. "No, sir. Cadet Hale does not act recklessly. He acts decisively when others are in danger. There is a meaningful clinical difference between those two things." A Keeltherian admiral leaned forward. "He has nearly died 4 times in 7 months. Doctor, that pattern suggests either extraordinarily poor judgment or extraordinarily poor luck." "It suggests," I said, "that Cadet Hale values other lives more than his own safety, which, in my understanding, is traditionally considered a virtue in military service rather than a pathology." "It is a virtue that gets soldiers killed," the admiral countered. "It is also a virtue that wins wars." I met his eyes. "Respectfully, Admiral." Frex made a low sound that I had learned over 9 years to interpret as the vexy equivalent of suppressed amusement. "The doctor makes a reasonable point. Continue your assessment." I stood in front of that council of 12 and said what I had been slowly working out for 7 months. Cadet Hale is physically unremarkable by galactic standards. Humans are weaker, slower, and more fragile than the majority of species represented in this institution. They do not have our regenerative capacity. They do not have vexy structural density or Keeltherian predictive cognition or Morpheus phase capability. By conventional metrics, they should not be competitive in this environment. I paused. However, they possess a form of psychological resilience I have not observed in any other species in 3 centuries of military medicine. They can function through pain, through fear, through physical exhaustion that would incapacitate beings twice their size. They refuse to accept limitations that would halt any other species I treated. They metabolize failure differently, not as evidence of ceiling, but as a problem to be solved. And perhaps most significantly, when they form bonds of loyalty, those bonds override self-preservation at a level that is genuinely without precedent in my experience. The room was very quiet. "You mean pact bonds?" said one of the council members. "Yes, sir. Humans evolved as tribal creatures. When they adopt someone into their group, and Cadet Hale appears to have adopted everyone in this academy into his group, that person's survival becomes as important to them as their own. Sometimes more important. There is no tactical calculation, no risk assessment, no cost-benefit analysis. There is only, someone needs help, and I am able to provide it." Another long silence, the kind that fills up rooms when something true has been said. Then General Frex spoke. "The Galactic Council maintains a designation for individuals who demonstrate extraordinary valor across multiple documented engagements. The Eternal Honor Archive. Names entered into that record are recognized across all member species as exemplars of the highest military virtue." He looked at me directly. "This council has reviewed 3 separate incidents of extraordinary courage, with multiple confirmed lives saved and sustained academic and training performance throughout. We are considering an induction while Cadet Hale is still enrolled." Something cold and unexpected settled in my chest. "General, he hasn't graduated yet." "No, but graduation is a bureaucratic milestone. What he has demonstrated is not." Frex held my gaze. "Doctor, in your medical opinion, can Cadet Hale physically endure the Honor Archive induction ceremony? It requires standing at attention for approximately 2 hours. I thought about the leg wound, the not-quite-healed ribs, the shoulder damage that still limited his range of motion in cold environments. I thought about Marcus sitting against that wall with blood running down his calf, saying it already hurts. Might as well fix it. Yes, sir. Humans are exceptionally stubborn about standing when they are told to. Frex's face did something that might have been a smile. The ceremony will be in 4 days. You will ensure he is medically cleared to attend. So, he is going to be completely impossible after this. Doctor. Frex stood, and the room stood with him. I suspect Cadet Hale will be exactly the same as he has always been. That, I believe, is precisely the point. The Grand Hall of Galactic Military Academy held 2,000 beings the morning of the ceremony, cadets from every species in the enrollment roster, Academy staff who had been on Practice 7 for decades, officers who had flown in from off-world when the announcement circulated through command channels. The gallery was standing room only, and the gallery was designed for species who did not need to stand. Marcus Hale stood at attention in the center of the whole floor. His leg was still bandaged under his dress uniform. His shoulders still had restricted range of motion from damage that had not fully resolved. His ribs moved carefully when he breathed, a slight, controlled shallowness that I recognized from monitoring his biometrics, the unconscious adjustment of a body managing pain without letting it show. He stood perfectly still for 2 hours and 17 minutes. I watched from the medical officer's gallery with my scanner running passively, because I am nothing if not thorough, and because I wanted to be able to say, if anyone asked, that I had been watching his vitals the whole time. They were steady, slightly elevated for pain, otherwise unremarkable, which, for Marcus Hale, was its own kind of remarkable. General Frex read the commendations in full. All 3 incidents documented in complete detail. The names of every cadet whose survival was attributed to Marcus Hale's actions. The assessment of the Leadership Council. The recommendation that had been unanimous across 12 species and 12 military traditions. When Frex announced that Marcus Hale's name was being entered into the Eternal Honor Archive, the first human ever to receive such recognition while still a cadet, the youngest inductee in 4 decades, the Grand Hall did something I had not witnessed in 17 cycles of service on Practice 7. It erupted. Not polite applause. Not ceremonial acknowledgement. 2,000 beings, from species that had begun this year considering humans too fragile to belong here, came to their feet in a wave that started with the cadets and crashed through every tier of the gallery. Vexy warriors slammed their fists against their chests in the highest military salute that culture possessed. Keeltherians pressed their hands to their foreheads in a gesture reserved for those who have demonstrated irreplaceable value to others. The Morpheus operatives, who communicated through resonance rather than sound, produced a harmonic that the walls of the Grand Hall reflected back as something that felt, even to my Gordanian nervous system, like awe. Marcus stood at attention through all of it. He accepted his medal with both hands, as the archive protocol required. When he was finally permitted to speak, the hall went silent with an immediacy that 2,000 people rarely manage. He looked out at them, all of them, every species, every tradition, every being who had arrived on Practice 7 this year with the assumption that humans were the weakest link in any chain they were part of, and he said, quietly but clearly, "Thank you. I will try to live up to this." That was all. No grand declaration. No speech about humanity's place in the galaxy. No performance of the moment for the record books. Just a young man, a long way from home, with a bandaged leg and careful breathing and a medal held in both hands, meaning exactly what he said and nothing more. The hall erupted again, louder than before. I found him afterward in the medical wing waiting room. He was sitting alone in one of the standard chairs, which was slightly too large for him, as most furniture on Practice 7 was, turning the ceremonial medal over in his hands and looking at it with an expression I could not immediately name. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that looked more like the face of someone trying to decide whether they deserved the thing they had been given. "You should be with your teammates," I said. "They are celebrating." Loudly. "I can hear it from here." "I will be," he said. "I just needed a quiet minute first." I sat down in the chair beside him, which was also slightly too large, and said nothing for a while. Outside, through the walls of the medical wing, the celebration in the cadet quarters was building towards something sustained and genuinely joyful. In here, it was very quiet. "Does it hurt?" I asked eventually. "The standing?" "Yes, sir." He smiled, that same smile from the very first day, when I had told him not to break any bones, and he had said he'd do his best. But it's good pain, the kind that reminds you that you're alive. We sat in silence for another moment. The metal caught the light and held it. Dr. Thoric, Marcus said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think this changes anything? For other humans who want to come here?" I considered the question with the care it deserved. I thought about the 2,000 beings who had risen to their feet in the Grand Hall that morning. I thought about the Vexi warrior who had stood beside me in a glacial ravine and asked, with genuine bewilderment, how Marcus was still breathing. I thought about Renovos visiting every single day, sitting in that chair with an expression her species had no name for. I thought about the Leadership Council, unanimous across 12 species. I thought about what it means to change something that has been assumed true for so long that it stops being an assumption and simply becomes the shape of the world. "Yes, Cadet," I said, "I believe it changes everything." He nodded slowly, still looking at the metal. "Good," he said softly. "That's good. Now go celebrate before I fabricate a medical reason to keep you under observation overnight." He stood, carefully, because the leg was still healing, because some things even Marcus Hale could not simply decide not to feel, and he looked at me one last time with those dark, steady eyes. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for everything." I watched him walk out of my medical wing and turn toward the sound of celebration echoing through the Academy's corridors. The noise swelled when he arrived. I could hear it even from where I sat, a wave of sound that carried something in it beyond simple happiness, and then settled into something warm and sustained and full of the particular joy that belongs to people who have been through difficult things together and are, for one good night, simply glad to be alive. I sat in the quiet of my waiting room for a long time after he left. My species has administered military medicine for 300 years. We are proud of our precision, our mastery of biological systems, our ability to define with confidence what is possible and what is merely wishful thinking, our capacity to look at a set of readings and know, with certainty, what they mean and what they predict. We do not deal in wishful thinking. We deal in facts. Marcus Hale spent 7 months teaching me that human facts do not look like anyone else's. When they decide something is necessary, possibility becomes irrelevant. When someone they love is in danger, the body stops being a set of limitations and becomes a set of tools. When they are told they are too weak, too slow, too fragile for the world they want to occupy, they do not argue. They do not protest. They simply wait for the moment when they can prove it wrong, and then they do it quietly, without fanfare, with both hands, meaning exactly what they say. His name is etched in the Eternal Honor Archive now. The first human cadet. The youngest inductee in 4 decades. A permanent record that an unremarkable young man from an unremarkable species, 7 months into his training on a world designed to break the weak, proved himself worthy of the highest military recognition the galaxy can offer. I have been asked, since that ceremony, whether I think it will happen again, whether other humans will find their way to that archive, whether what Marcus showed us is something replicable, or whether it was a singular anomaly, a once-in-a-generation accident of character and circumstance that the galaxy was lucky enough to witness and should not expect to see again. I give them the same answer every time. It is not an accident. It is not an anomaly. It is not something that visits humans occasionally, when the stars align. It is what they are, all of them, in their own ways, in their own moments, carrying that same quiet fire underneath the fragile exterior that fools everyone who hasn't learned to look for it. We simply did not have the instruments to measure it until Marcus Hale walked into my infirmary on arrival day, pale and underweight and smiling, and asked a polite question about nutrition supplements. His name is in the archive, and I believe, with a full weight of 17 cycles and everything I have witnessed, that it will not be the last human name written there. In fact, I am counting on it. I have been running the Galactic Military Academy's medical wing for 17 cycles now. In that time, I have watched beings of extraordinary power walk through my doors, Braxy warlords who could bend titanium bars with their bare hands, Keeltherian mind-wavers who could predict enemy movements 3 steps ahead, Morpheus assassins who could phase through solid matter as though it was smoke. I have treated the finest warriors the galaxy has to offer, and I have buried a few of them too. After 17 cycles, very little surprises me. Humans surprise me. My name is Dr. Ven Thoric. I am a Gordanian, 9 feet of dense muscle, bone reinforced over millennia of evolutionary pressure, and regenerative capabilities that make conventional death little more than an inconvenience. My species has administered military medicine for 3 centuries, not because we are the most brilliant healers in the galaxy, but because we are extraordinarily difficult to kill and almost impossible to intimidate. We do not flinch when soldiers come to us broken. We simply fix them and send them back. Marcus Hale almost made me flinch, but not at first. At first, he was simply another fragile human I fully expected to wash out before the first month ended. The Academy sits on Practice 7, a heavy gravity world selected specifically because it weeds out the weak. The gravity runs at 2.4 times Earth standard. The atmospheric pressure is sufficient to collapse underdeveloped lung structures. The training regimens were designed by species for whom pain is not a deterrent but a teacher. Humans call the environment brutal. We called it standard. When 5 human cadets arrived on arrival day, I logged their vitals with clinical detachment, elevated heart rates, labored breathing, visible muscle tremors from fighting the gravity. Predictable. Expected. Marcus Hale stood at the back of the group. He was pale by human standards, underweight by galactic ones. His shoulders were narrow, his frame slight. I remember thinking that the Academy would break him gently, at least. He looked at me with dark, steady eyes and said, "Dr. Thoric, is there a recommended nutrition plan for humans adjusting to high-gravity environments?" I gestured vaguely toward the datapad on my desk. Supplement intake is listed in Section 7. Try not to break any bones in your first week. Cadet. He smiled. Actually smiled. "I'll do my best, so." I assumed that would be the last interesting thing about him. I was wrong in ways that still astonish me. 3 days later, Marcus walked back into my medical wing, but not as a patient. Cadet Renovos, an Etherian with triple reinforced skeletal structure, had collapsed during atmospheric training. Her breathing apparatus had malfunctioned at 12,000 feet. She had dropped like a stone during a simulated combat drop, and her species possessed a respiratory system so complex that improper intervention could kill her faster than the fall itself. The instructors were still organizing the rescue team when Marcus, apparently, decided that waiting was not an option. I watched the security footage 3 times before I accepted that it was real. Marcus located an emergency paraglider in a supply rack near the drop zone. The paraglider was engineered for species with 2 to 3 times the body mass of a human. He strapped it on anyway, stepped to the edge of the platform, and jumped into 12,000 feet of open sky above a 2.4 gravity world, with 0 authorization, 0 backup, and a piece of equipment that was not designed for his physiology. The paraglider worked against him immediately. The harness, built for wider shoulder spans, bit into his collarbones with every gust of wind. The atmospheric pressure, that altitude, in that gravity, was enough to strain even my species. For a human, it should have been catastrophic. I later found stress fractures in both of his clavicles, damage he sustained in the first 30 seconds of flight, while never once slowing down. He reached Cadet Renovos in 4 to 7 seconds. She outweighed him by more than 200 pounds. Her respiratory failure required precise sequential intervention that even trained medical staff sometimes struggled with. Marcus had 90 seconds before the oxygen deprivation would begin causing permanent neurological damage. He stabilized her in 70. When the official rescue team finally descended to their position, Marcus had already deployed both emergency chutes, secured Renovos against him, and was talking her through the panic response in a calm, measured voice, while his own body, unbeknownst to him, was quietly shutting down from the accumulated damage. They brought him to my medical wing unconscious. Fractured clavicles, severely torn shoulder muscles, internal bleeding from the pressure differential, acute hypoxia, early-stage shock. I stabilized him because that is my job, but while I worked, something nagged at me. That polite smile from 3 days ago. That calm, practical question about nutrition. This young man had nearly killed himself to save someone he had known for less than 72 hours, and he had done it with a smile on his face and a datapad question in his recent memory. When Marcus woke 6 hours later, his first words were, "Is Rena okay?" "Cadet Voss is fine," I said, running my scanner over his chest. "You, on the other hand, have spent the afternoon testing the absolute outer limits of human physiological durability. Congratulations, you have discovered several new ones." He tried to sit up. I pushed him back down with a single finger. Your shoulders are being held together with medical adhesive and hope. Do not move. How long until I can return to training? He asked, as though I had told him nothing of importance. 3 weeks minimum. Human tissue does not regenerate at the rate of most species here. Can we make it 2 weeks?